Dear listeners, the important aspect to note in England during the Restoration is the tremendous social resistance to the restraints of Puritanism. The wide swing of the pendulum is palpable. For a generation, many a source of gratification had been put down. Theatres were closed indefinitely, and the writing of plays and going to theatres had almost come to a standstill. Now the theatres were reopened, bull and bear baiting renewed, interest in sports, music, and dancing encouraged. A wild delight in the pleasures and vanities of this world began to gain ground. In literature, the change is no less marked. The age was one of the transition from the luxuriance and energy of Renaissance literature to the formality and polish of the Augustan age. To get familiar with the restoration and the literature of the 18th century, which is remarkably complex, carefully listen this audio. Good luck. If I say about the introduction, from 1660 to 1800, England was ruled by a series of monarchs, starting with Charles II and Restoration. In 1685, when he died, James II, his Scottish Catholic brother, took over. But he ruled for only 3 years when he had to flee to France because of the Glorious Revolution, which ushered in the parliamentary system, and henceforth the monarch became only the ritual head. King William and Queen Mary, who succeeded him on this compromise, ruled for 14 years. Queen Anne followed. After came George III. Drama found patronage in various degrees during the reigns of these monarchs. Charles II favored theatre the most, while Queen Anne displayed traditional stout support. She failed to take personal interest in it. King George III and his successors in the second half of the 18th century encouraged the opera, which is a kind of musical play, rather than long five-act plays. It was during the reign of William and Mary that the Restoration drama seemed to have lost its adulting audience and faced charges of immorality and licentiousness. For our purpose in this unit on drama, we shall divide the period between 1660 to 1800 into four parts. The Restoration being the first, the transition as the second, the early 18th century as the next and third, and the late or second half of the 18th century as the last. The years between 1660 to 1702 is generally denoted as the Restoration period. This period is by no means homogeneous either politically and culturally because of the glorious revolution of the 1688. The period between 1688 to 1702 is denoted as the transition political owing to the parliamentary revolution, which was democratic and anti-royalist. Culturally, the actual change did not occur until the second decade of the 18th century, especially in the type of drama. It is common to note that Jeremy Collier's attack on the immorality of the stage in his pamphlet, A Short View of the Immorality of the Stage in 1689, as the most representative demand for theatrical change. A Puritan preached by professional Collier's didactic libel against the Restoration theatre was voicing public protest, expressing the prevalent Protestant evangelical mood of the times. Playwrights like Congreve and Farquhar attempted to answer the demands of the public with refinement in their comedies, but the actual transformation be seen only in the sentimental dramas of Steele, Cumberland, and Sibber, etc. At the close of the 18th century, Sheridan and Goldsmith were writing anti-sentimental plays, though. The Restoration period is also noted as the neoclassical period, especially in literature. The classical forms of poetry and drama were admired and imitated as models. In drama, the revival of the heroic or worse drama is a significant aspect of the neoclassicism. We shall limit our discussion of the neoclassicism to heroic tragedy in this unit. That means the remaining discussion can be found in unit 2 and 3 in connection with poetry and literary criticism respectively. After the 1740s, the influence of neoclassicism waned. The heroic tragedy became extinct and no other truly tragic form emerged. A type of tragedy called domestic tragedy existed, which was influenced by the French classical tragedy and German romantic drama of Schiller. As far as comedy is concerned, a new form unique to the Restoration called the comedy of manners or the comedy of wit emerged. It was a clean break from the classical comedy, for it was social and urban rather than ritualistic. In the transition, the comedy of manners became refined. The comedy of manners was satirical and entertaining, but the sentimental comedy of the 18th century linked to pathos and morality with a happy ending and tended towards sensation rather than satire. In the second half of the 18th century, the musical comedy or opera was very popular. Thus, we may not note four distinct dramatic forms in English theatre: heroic tragedy, comedy of manners, sentimental comedy, and opera from 1660 to 1800. Courtly culture. Courtly culture. After the Restoration, most of the older nobility was unable to recover the loss of land and title from the Cromwell government and remained poor. Charles II had partly made up by restoring church and royal property, but it covered only confiscated land. The new middle class, made up by merchants, lawyers, army officers, and traders, consolidated their status. The relation between the lord and the peasant would never be the same ever again. Charles himself surrendered most of his inherited feudal rights in return for various taxes. The peerage was closed until Queen Anne's time. Even so, courtly life was as resplendent as ever for those nobles who had made it through the revolution. Even if the countryside remained conservative and consciousness, the urban London was the center of courtly life. It is enough to say that the peccadillos and excess of the London barons and nobility was meal to the common public and gossip. Samuel Pepys, the diarist, record how a conversation with a friend turned to matters of the court and its debauchery, and writes that Charles would do service to England if he banished such members of his court. He remarks of the king and the Duke of Monmouth, admits Charles' illegitimate son, whom he had chanced to meet closely. The more a man considers and observes them, the less he finds of a difference between them and other men. Though it means blessed to be God, they are both princes of great nobleness and spirits. Entry from July 26, 1665. He also records the grand coronation of Charles II and the procession that followed in the streets of London. London was also the place for the aspiring poet who hoped for royal patronage. It is said of London during this time that if a poet wished to make a name for himself as an author, he could find an audience only there. Jonathan Swift, the satirist of the time, in Rhapsody on Poetry, Rights of the Court, satirizing the tradition of patronage, it means of poets and authors. Whence Gave was banished in disgrace, where Pope will never show his face, where young must torture his invention to flatter news or lose his pension. Attend ye popes and youngs and gays, and tune your harps and strive your bass, your panegyrics here provide, your cannot hear on flattery's side. The ambitious poet, in the hope of pleasing a noble into patronizing him with lavish panegyrics and dedications willy-nilly, all insincere and untrue. But it was rewarding and made them wealthy and financially secure overnight. In addition to the court, with the greater influence of Whiggism, the coffee houses and Grub Street clubs of London became the centers of literary activity where even poets like Dryden and Pope are supposed to have mingled at Will's Coffee House. Here was, of course, the negative side of this growth, that there was a unhealthy increase in the production of pamphlets and lampoons written by anonymous Grub Street hacks, of whom Pope satirizes an epistle to Dr. Arbuthnot. Now we know about the theatre. The Restoration literary scenery burgeoned under the influence of monarchy. The Puritan government of the Revolution had banned all art and culture, including drama. The theatre buildings had been dismantled. Now they had to be rebuilt. Until the glorious revolution, there were the theatre, the ambience of the court and the upper class lifestyle and manners. It was not until after 1698 that the king was urged to pass a licensing act for the stage and actors. It was only in 1737 when Sir Robert Walpole, the first Prime Minister, passed the Stage Licensing Act. Did playwrights, actors, and managers actually face something like censorship. But by then, the theatre had weathered the Puritan reaction successfully, and the censorship mostly targeted at the political aspect of a play. For example, under this act, Charles Macklin's The Man of the World was refused performance in 1764. The Licensing Act stipulated that plays should be submitted 15 days in advance to the Lord Chamberlain's approval. The performance of spoken drama was limited to two theatres, Drury Lane and Covent Gardens, both in London. Metropolitan London was the hub of theatrical activity. At the Restoration, there were two public theatres licensed by royal letters of patents, one run and owned by Sir William D. Avenant, patronized by Charles first himself. The other was owned by Sir Thomas Killigrew, who was patronized by the Duke of York, later King James II. Brother of the king, Sir William Devanant had been an actor during Charles I reign and also the poet laureate in 1656. He had attempted to revive drama by writing a play named The Siege of Rhodes, defying the ban of the interregnum for a private audience. Devanant had also attempted two other plays before the 1660s, and it seems natural for Charles II to appoint him as the master of the company Lincoln's Second Fields and Dorset Gardens. Thomas Killigrew, on the other hand, was author of comedy The Parson's Wedding before the theatre was closed in 1642 during the time of the Revolution, and now owned the company at Drury Lane. In the 18th century, the theatre ownership passed on to actor Thomas Betterton at Lincoln's Inns Field and to Christopher Rich, later to actor Collie Cyber at Drury Lane. In addition to these theatres, there were a number of private theatres meant for private performance. Incidentally, the theatres of the Restoration were built upon tennis grounds and modelled on the architecture of the tennis court. Let's know about the audience. To this theatre came the aristocratic London society as well as the common middle class made up of traders, merchants, lawyers, and others. Even the king attended these shows. The theatre at this time might have attracted the common people only if to gossip and watch the king and courtiers. For the courtiers, the theatre was a favorite meeting place. They commented freely and even paid to sit on the stage during performance. Sir Charles Sedley, Sir Robert Howard, the Earl of Orrery, the Earl of Rochester, and the Duke of Buckingham were frequent audience and wrote plays themselves. Some noblemen gave their fine clothes to actors and actresses. Playwrights like Dryden, Congreve, men of letters like Samuel Johnson, Pope, and others all made it a point to attend premiere shows of the dramas. They socialized and exchanged views on them. If at the Restoration, the theatre audience was mainly composed of aristocrats and courtiers, at the turn of the country, the middle class dominated. The audience increased in size. The 18th century audience came to the theatre not to get a view of aristocratic lifestyle but to moralize. They expected drama to reform society. This influenced the dramas of the 18th century just as the Restoration audience influenced the drama produced during the 17th century. But even so, drama still represented the upper class, and now it was the fashionable middle class wig instead of the courtier. Now we look about the actors. At first, there were actors like Thomas Betterton, David Garrick, Spranger Barry, Kitty Clive, Peg Woffington, and Susanna Arneck Cyber. Later came J.D. Campbell, John Palmer, and Sarah Siddon. Many of the playwrights were also actors or had done a stint of acting initially. For example, Farrakher gave up acting after accidentally wounding a fellow actor, Samuel Foote, who wrote very popular plays and operas, also acted. Charles Diddon wrote music and songs for operas and acted. David Garrick, the most famous actor of the Restoration, came to London with Samuel Johnson to a literary career in 1737. Was himself a playwright but held away of the theatre along with Thomas Betterton more as an actor. He performed over 90 roles. Among them were the famous tragic roles of Hamlet and Lear, comic roles of Don Felix, Archie, Scrub and Bass. Collie Cyber was a popular comic actor and also ran the Drury Lane. King Charles II also permitted women actors on the basis that it was moral for women to perform their own roles instead of vulgar impersonation by men. Nell Gwyn, later his mistress, was one such actress. Charles is supposed to have fallen in love with her when she delivered a dedication in his favor on such a theatrical event. Because of the inclusion of women actors, there was a preoccupation with the relation of the sexes and also greater freedom to discuss. Performance. The excitement of the Restoration Theatre was very different from the Renaissance drama. Plays did not run for more than 6 to 7 times on average. Performances were often in a shambles. The wit and dialogue of the shows were often very vulgar and low without the seriousness of a Weber or a John Soin play. Normally, the shows began at 4 o'clock and ended by 7, but later in the 18th century they were pushed to as late as 6:30. The theaters were open for roughly 185 nights in a year. In the 18th century, it began to be fashionable to have double and triple features shows, which included a short play with a farce and musical or ballet, a kind of a dance drama. Ballet means there were fewer long five-act plays which had been popular in the beginning, that is the Restoration. Perhaps this was due to the fact that there was tough competition from minor theatres which held spectacles, ballets, and other kinds of displays. If during the Restoration plays and roles were written exclusively for the main actors, by the mid 18th century ensemble acting became frequent. The companies mostly revived older plays by engaging hack writers in order to avoid paying a nice sum to the authors as well as to avoid costly failures of new plays. The physical aspect of the stage also had changed. The apron stage was replaced by the proscenium and box seat. The theater was completely roofed in. The audience were seated only on one side of the stage, that was in front of it. The stage setting was realistic as far as stage props were concerned. There were attempts to create elaborate background scenery, especially in connection with the heroic tragedy, but mostly painted side and wings and shutters were used to simulate the background. Verbal description and familiar location were used to indicate outdoor location rather than scenery. No curtains were used for change of scenes, and the stage had to be arranged in full view of the audience. The stage had four doors on the side of the proscenium, above which were balconies. These balconies were used to realistically. The orchestra sat in front of the proscenium in the pit instead of above the inner stage as in Renaissance theatre. Footlights or floats, so called because the tallow candles were placed floating in trays with water, were used in front of the stage. In addition, artificial lighting, that is, candles and candeliers, were placed hanging overhead in front of the stage. Curtains were light throughout performance. This theatre could seat 800 at a time and was 51 by 30 feet at Dorset Gardens and 66 by 31 feet at Drury Lane in 1671. Now let's go about the dramas. The type of drama that was produced during this time was influenced by the French trends, chiefly because the exiles during the Revolution had spent their youth in France. Even Devanant must have become acquainted firsthand with the French drama, as The Siege of Rhodes was written at Corneille's suggestion. Even though the author calls it entertainment after the manner of ancients, it was in the mode of an operatic ballet with a lot of music, singing, and dancing. It used to elaborate scenery and was set in Rome. During this time, the French theatrical scenario was dominated by playwrights like Molière, Racine, and Corneille. The English comedy of manners seemed to have taken its cue from these French dramatists. Latin and Spanish dramatists like Combreville, La Calprenède, the Scourges, and Majori seem to have influenced the English heroic drama. The later, that is in 18th century, operas were adapted from Italian musical ballets. Then let's go revival of Shakespeare. But there was also a great revival of the older native traditions coming from Shakespeare and Johnson. For example, Thomas Killigrew opened his theatre with Shakespeare's Henry IV and Part 1 in November 1616. Shakespeare was a favorite because the Restoration playwright wanted to reintroduce royalist themes. Shakespeare's plays like Hamlet, Othello, Julius Caesar were produced throughout the centuries as they were with few changes. The actor Thomas Betterton is said to have taken training under Devanant to act in them. This trend continued in the 18th century also. Then it became a sure way of securing against failure and loss at box office. But it was more popular to revise these olden plays to suit the new audience. Generally, this revision introduced operatic music and Paratasic characters are transformed to comic and romantic love plots are devised to suit the taste of the public. Samuel Pepys, after watching one such revision on stage, records in his diary how he thought Shakespeare's original Midsummer Night's Dream insipid. It is in entry 29 September 1662 and Othello's Meaning Thing entry 20th August 1660 in comparison. Some of these adaptations were outlandish. For example, Macbeth was adorned with ballads and The Tempest was transformed into an opera by Sir William Davenant. He also joined Measure for Measure and Much Ado About Nothing to write a new play called The Law Against Lovers. It is in 1661. It's part 2. A comedy. Nahum Tate rewrote King Lear in 1681 into farce with a happy ending in which Cordelia and Eager, Meryl and Lear and Gloucester survive. The Fool is omitted. He also revised another play, Coriolanus, to produce the ingratitude of Commonwealth. It is in 1681, which has a royalist theme. Alexander Pope, in his epistle to Dr. Arbuthnot citizens, state that 9 bad points made a Tate when he proposed to the King William to regulate the stage and stage plays. But the spirit of revival remained as jealous as ever. George Granville, another playwright, rewrote Merchant of Venice as Jew of Venice in 1698. In this play, Shylock is made into a comic character. Thomas Otway's The History and Fall of Quos Marius, 1618, adapts Romeo and Juliet in a Roman setting. John Dryden, The Charm, a literature of the Restoration, himself chose to adapt Antony and Cleopatra in his heroic play All for Love. These plays are recast in a classical Roman setting and used elaborate realistic background. Shakespeare's other history plays that were rewritten are the history of King Richard II. His time was 1680 by Nahum Tate and the melodramatic Richard III by Coley Cyber. Let us sum up. The Restoration theatre was different from the Renaissance in terms of architecture, types of drama and performance. The restoration of monarchy played a great role in the revival of drama. It set the mood of the dramas whose favorite themes were courtly. The two most important dramatic forms of the 17th century were the tragic-comic heroic verse drama and the comedy of manners. Likewise, the two most important forms of the 18th century were the sentimental comedy and the comic opera. Then the Restoration introduced women on the stage as actors for the first time in English history. The dramas were influenced by French, Spanish, and Italian theatres. In addition, there was a revival of the native tradition, especially of Shakespeare. After this audio, you are able to describe the Restoration stage and write an account of the influence of monarchy on Restoration drama. Then discuss briefly the various dramatic influences on Restoration drama. Then you are able to write a note on the revival of Shakespeare.